Hello and welcome back to Jimmy Talks. Today we are addressing a question that has lingered in the minds of many Americans for years. Why do politicians consistently outperform the S&P 500? The S&P 500, as most of you know, is a stock market index that tracks the performance of 500 of the largest publicly traded companies in the United States. It is widely regarded as a benchmark for the overall health of the US economy and the stock market. Over the long term, it has delivered an average annual return of approximately 10% since its inception in 1957, before adjusting for inflation. For the average investor, achieving returns that consistently exceed this benchmark is a challenging feat, requiring exceptional skill, timing, and honestly, mostly just luck. Yet, study after study has shown that US politicians, members of Congress in particular, manage to do just that, often by significant margins. This raises serious questions about fairness, legality, and the integrity of those entrusted to serve the public. Let us begin with the evidence. Multiple academic studies and investigative reports have documented the extraordinary financial performance of politicians' investment portfolios. One of the most notable studies, published in 2011 by researchers including Alan Zabrowski of Georgia State University, analyzed 61,998 stock trades made by members of the U.S. House of Representatives between 2004 and 2010. The findings were striking. House members outperformed the S&P 500 by an average of 6 percentage points annually. To put this into perspective, if the S&P 500 returned 10% in a given year, the average House member's portfolio would have returned 16%. Over the same period, the study found that senators performed even better, beating the market by 10 percentage points per year, meaning a 20% return in a year when the S&P 500 returned 10. These are not isolated incidents, though. The researchers describe these gains as both economically large and statistically significant, far exceeding what could be attributed to random chance or superior investing acumen. More recent data reinforces these findings. In 2011, a report by Unusual Whales, a financial analysis platform, examined the stock trades of members of Congress and found that their portfolios collectively outperformed the S&P 500 by a substantial margin. That year, the S&P 500 returned 28.7%, an impressive figure by historical standards considering it normally grows by 10. Yet, according to Unusual Whales, 105 members of Congress bought and sold nearly $290 million worth of stocks, and their average returns either matched or exceeded the S&P 500's performance. Some individual lawmakers achieved gains that were nothing short of extraordinary. For example, the report highlighted House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, whose husband, Paul Pelosi, manages their family's investments through his firm, Financial Leasing Services. In one notable trade, Pelosi disclosed exercising 150 call options on Microsoft stock on March 19, 2021, at a strike price of $130. Just 12 days later, on March 31st, the U.S. Army announced a $22 billion augmented reality deal with Microsoft, a company that boosted the company's stock price. A contract that boosted the company's stock price, sorry. By October 2021, when the Army reiterated its commitment to the partnership, Pelosi's investment had reportedly increased by 160%. Not suspicious at all that she just happened to get such good timing, right? While the exact timing and intent cannot be proven, the proximity of this trade to a major government contract raises obvious questions. This pattern is not limited to a single year or a handful of lawmakers. A 2004 study by Zabrowski and his team found that senators' portfolios outperformed the market by 12 percentage points annually from 1993 to 1998. Another analysis, covering trades from 2004 to 2010, showed high-ranking Republicans beat the market by 35% over that period. Even in 2022, a year when the S&P 500 lost 18% of its value due to inflation, rising interest rates, and global uncertainty, posts on platforms like X suggest that the average stock returns of U.S. politicians remained close to zero, effectively preserving their wealth while ordinary investors suffered significant losses. These consistent results across decades and market conditions suggests something more than luck or skill is at play. So, how do politicians achieve these remarkable returns? The most obvious explanation is insider trading, the use of non public material information to make profitable investment decisions. Unlike corporate executives or Wall Street professionals, members of Congress have unique access to sensitive information that can move markets. They sit on committees that oversee industries like defense, healthcare, and technology. They receive classified briefings on national security threats, economic policies, and pending legislation. They interact with lobbyists, corporate leaders, and regulators who provide insights unavailable to the public. This information, if acted upon, gives them an unfair advantage over ordinary investors who rely solely on publicly available data. Consider the case of the COVID-19 pandemic. On January 24th, 2020, the Senate Health Committee received a closed door briefing from Dr. Anthony Fauci and other officials about the emerging risk of the virus. At that time, the American public was largely unaware of the scale of the threat. Yet, within days, several senators made significant stock trades. Senator Richard Burr, then chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, sold between $628,000 and $1.72 million worth of stocks on February 13th, 2020, just 1 week before the market crashed due to pandemic fears. Not suspicious at all. Senator Kelly Loeffler, whose husband is the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, pretty suspicious, just a coincidence, right? Began selling dozens of stocks on January 24th, the very day of the briefing, and continued through mid-February, while also buying shares in Citrix, a teleworking software company that would benefit from lockdowns. These trades, man, they preceded a global financial panic that saw the S&P 500 drop nearly 34% from its peak in February to its trough in March 2020. While both senators denied wrongdoing, claiming their trades were managed by third parties or based on public information, the timing is difficult to dismiss as a coincidence. These examples illustrate a broader problem. The legal framework governing politicians' trading is woefully inadequate. Before 2012, members of Congress were effectively exempt from insider trading laws that applied to the private sector. The Securities Exchange Act of 1934, which prohibits trading on material non-public information, did not explicitly cover lawmakers. This changed with the passage of the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act, or the Stock Act, in 2012, which clarified that members of Congress and their staff are subject to the same insider trading prohibitions as everyone else. The Stock Act also mandated that lawmakers disclose their stock transactions within 45 days, making their trades more transparent. However, enforcement of this remains weak. The Securities and Exchange Commissions, the SEC, which oversees insider trading cases, rarely investigates politicians. Wonder why. Penalties, when imposed, are often minor and criminal charges are almost non-existent. To date, only one member of Congress has faced significant legal consequences for insider trading. In 2018, Representative Chris Collins of New York pleaded guilty to insider trading charges after tipping his son off about a failed drug trial at a biotech company where he served on the board. Collins was sentenced to a mere 26 months in prison, but he was pardoned by President Donald Trump in 2020 before serving his full term. Other high-profile cases, like those involving Burr and Loeffler, have resulted in investigations but no charges. The Department of Justice probed Burr's trades in 2020 but closed the case without prosecution. Loeffler faced no formal penalties. This lack of accountability sends a clear message. Politicians can exploit their positions with little fear of repercussions. The implication for U.S. citizens are profound and deeply troubling. When politicians outperform the S&P 500 by such wide margins, it suggests that they're cheating, using their power and access to enrich themselves at the expense of the public that they serve. This is not just an ethical breach, it is a betrayal of trust that undermines democracy. Ordinary Americans invest their hard-earned money in the stock market, often through retirement accounts like 401ks, which are heavily tied to the S&P 500. When the market declines, as it did by 18% in 2022, these investors lose wealth, sometimes jeopardizing their financial security. Meanwhile, politicians armed with insider knowledge protect or grow their fortunes, widening the gap between the ruling class and the people that they represent. This behavior is also criminal in spirit, if not always in practice. Insider trading is a felony under U.S. law, punishable by up to 20 years in prison and fines of up to $5 million per violation. If a corporate executive used confidential information to make trades like those of Burr or Leffler, they would face swift prosecution. Yet, politicians enjoy a double standard, shielded by lax enforcement and a culture of impunity. This is not a victimless crime. When lawmakers prioritize personal gain over public duty, they erode confidence in government. A 2023 Pew Research Center survey found that 80% of U.S. adults believe campaign donors and lobbyists have too much influence on Congress, and 79% say lawmakers do a poor job of separating their personal financial interests from their work. Public approval of Congress hovers around 10 and 30%, reflecting widespread disgust with this self-serving behavior. The scale of the problem is staggering. In 2021 alone, the $290 billion in stock trades reported by 105 members of Congress dwarfed the median net worth of American households, which was $121,700 according to the Federal Reserve's 2019 Survey of Consumer Finances. Many lawmakers enter office with modest means but leave as multimillionaires. Nancy Pelosi's net worth, for instance, is estimated at over $100 million, much of it tied to her husband's investment success. While not all of his wealth comes from stock trading, the pattern of outsized returns among politicians suggests that their positions provide unique financial advantages unavailable to the average citizen like you or I. This abuse of power has real consequences, so when politicians trade on insider information, they may shape legislation or policy to benefit their portfolios rather than the public. For example, a lawmaker with heavy investments in a defense contractor might push for increased military spending, even if it's not in the nation's best interest. A senator with stakes in a pharmaceutical company might resist drug prices reforms that would help millions of Americans but hurt their personal bottom line. These conflicts of interest distort the democratic process, turning public service into a vehicle for private enrichment. So why does this persist? Part of the answer lies in the system itself. Politicians write the laws that govern their behavior, and they have little incentive to impose strict limits on themselves. Efforts to ban stock trading by members of Congress have gained traction in recent years, but progress is slow. In 2020, Representative Abigail Spanberger and Chip Roy introduced the Trust in Congress Act, which would require lawmakers to place their assets in blind trust, removing their ability to trade individual stocks. The bill has 29 co-sponsors as of 2023, including bipartisan support, but it has not been brought to a vote. Go figure, right? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, one of the most prolific traders in Congress, dismissed the idea in 2021, saying, "We're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that." This resistance from leadership highlights the entrenched interest at play. The hypocrisy is glaring. Politicians often campaign on promises of fairness and equality, yet their actions reveal a different reality. They exploit their positions to gain wealth that most Americans can only dream of, all while facing minimal accountability. This is not just unethical, it's a form of corruption that deserves punishment. If insider trading laws were applied equally, many lawmakers would face jail time. The fact that they don't is a failure of justice and a stain on the nation's integrity. So, what can be done about this? First, the Stock Act must be strengthened. The 45-day disclosure window is too long. Trades should be reported within days, if not in real time, to ensure transparency. Second, enforcement must be rigorous. The SEC and Department of Justice should prioritize cases involving politicians, treating them with the same severity as corporate offenders. Third, Congress should pass a ban on individual stock trading by lawmakers and their immediate families. Blind trust or broad-based index funds like those tied to the S&P 500 would allow them to invest without conflicts of interest. Finally, the public must demand accountability. Politicians work for the people, not themselves. When they cheat the system, they steal from us all. The evidence is clear. Politicians outperform the S&P 500 not because they're financial geniuses, but because they abuse their positions. They trade on information the public cannot access, skirt the laws that govern others, and escape the consequences of their actions. This is wrong. It is harmful to U.S. citizens who bear the burden of market downturns while lawmakers prosper. And it is criminal in its essence, even if the courts rarely say so. These individuals are not above the law. They should face the same penalties as anyone else who cheats to get ahead. Until that happens, the question will remain: why do politicians always outperform the S&P 500? The answer, unfortunately, is as obvious as it is unjust. Thank you for joining me on Jimmy Talks. If you found this discussion compelling, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below because I read all of the comments. Until next time, stay informed and take care. Love you all.